Okay, good morning. Algebra 2, first hour. This should be Wednesday the 22nd. And we've been looking at these geometric sequences where our numbers keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger as we go. And we saw that on Monday's lottery problem. That second option, the payouts got huge at the end. Okay, so our numbers kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, what happens if our numbers go the other way? What happens if they keep getting smaller? All right, so up until now on that lottery problem and on Tuesday's work, you were always multiplying to get your next number. So if we're getting smaller, as we see here, we're going from 256 to 128, 128 to 64, 64 to 32. We're getting smaller, so we wouldn't be multiplying. We would be dividing, okay, or we would think that we would be dividing. Now, I want to point this out right off the bat. Remember, that number that we multiply by is called our common ratio. Okay, and that's R. Now the way you find R, the surefire way to find R, is take any number in line and divide it by the first, or divide it by the number in front of it. So if I look at what I have here, that would give me a few options. I could take 128 divided by 256. I could take 64 divided by 128. I could take 32 divided by 64. That's the way you calculate your R. Pick a number and divide by the number in front of it. Of course, you can't pick the first number because it doesn't have a number in front of it. But if you do that on all those and you check out what all those are, you get 1/2. So the way we have to look at our R value, we must think about our R value as a multiplication. And just remember, if you wanted to divide by 2, that would be the same as multiplying by 1/2. Or if you wanted to divide by 10, that's the same as multiplying by 1/10. Okay, so we need to use 1/2 as our R value. In our head, we can think we're dividing by 2, but we really need to think of it as multiplying by 1/2. And that will come into play, and you'll see in the other examples today. But we would just continue this same pattern. We're dividing by 2, so we can divide by 2, we get 16. Divide by 2, we get 8. Divide by 2, we get 4. We can fill in those next 3 terms. But now when it comes to writing our rule, and I really need us to get good at this, if we go after some mystery number way out here in the line, call it again, that's A sub n, way out there. How do we get to that number? We start at the first number, 256. And in this case, we started multiplying by 1/2. There's where we have to use our 1/2. Okay, can't put a divide by 2 in there. We have to put in multiply by 1/2. And how many of them? Well, just like yesterday, n minus 1. So if we looked at, let's count them here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This a to the 4th is the 7th number in line. If we counted how many times we divided by 2, we'll go ahead and say divide by 2 here. If we count how many times we divide by 2 to get to our 4, it's 6. 7 minus 1. That's why that exponent right there is always n minus 1. That's how we write our rule. Okay. Now what you might see here is if we do continue this out a little farther, the next number would be 2, then divide by 2 we get 1. Then all of a sudden we're going to start getting decimals in our calculator. All right, so let's look at that. Okay, so here's how I would attack these. I see I'm getting smaller, all right? So the first thing I'm going to do is figure out what that R value is. And to do that R value, you take any number and divide by the number in front. So you could do 18 divided by 54. You could also do 6 divided by 18. Or you could do 2 divided by 6. All of these give you an answer of 1/3. That's what you need to use for your R here when we write our rule. Now, if we continue our list and say, hey, divide by 3, and you type in your calculator 2 divided by 3, you'll get a decimal. We don't want decimals here. Just use 2/3 as your answer. All right? Now what about the next number in line? Well, you'd be taking 2/3 and you'd be dividing by 3. Well, remember, dividing by 3 is the same as multiplying by 1/3. Then you just do 2 times 1 on the top for 2 and 3 times 3 on the bottom for 9. So the next number is 2/9, not that decimal that the calculator gives you. Then how do I get the next number? Well, I'll take 2/9, divide by 3. Well, we're not using divide by 3. We're using times 1/3. And what do we get for our third number? 2/27. That's how I want you to get these numbers as fractions. Okay? If they turn into fractions. I don't want those decimals the calculator is going to give you. So here's a spot chance, or a spot where the calculator may not help you unless you can use that ABC button. Use that ABC button, it might help you. Okay, and type in, to get 2/3, type in 2 times 1/3 with your ABC button. Then here you can type in 2/3 times 1/3 with that fraction button, and so on. Okay? Now what about our rule? Every one of these rules starts the same way. What goes first right there? Even if it was last week, we always started with the first number in line, which this one was 54. Okay, so we should always be able to get that number correct. It's the first number in our list, and I'll draw the arrow back over here. Then what comes next? Well, it's whatever you do. In this case, we are, and don't say dividing by 3. Say multiplying by 1/3. So you can just take that R value that you got over here and plug it in. And then what's the exponent? It's always n minus 1. There is your rule. Okay. Now actually we should be able to get the rule pretty quick. Let's look at number 3 and I'll show you what I mean. So on number 3, again, the first thing I would do would be figure out your R. Just pick a number, divide by the number in front. So you could do 250 over 1250. Again, you could do 50 divided by 250. You could do 10 divided by 50. All of them give you 1/5. So there's your R that you'll use. And then let's look at the rule first on this one. So what would our rule be here? Well, what number has to go first in our rule? Whatever is over here first in line, 1250. Then what comes next? Whatever you're doing. What are we doing? We just figured it out. We're multiplying by 1/5. So that's what we're doing. So that's what we plug in next, 1/5. And how many times do you multiply by 1/5? Now remember, when I say multiply by 1/5, I'm saying the same thing as dividing by 5. How many times do we do that? N minus 1. And we can get that rule actually before we do anything. Okay? Now we come up here and we fill in our next 3 spots. Remember, we're multiplying by 1/5 or we're dividing by 2. So we could just say right off the bat, divide by 2 and you get 5. Excuse me, we're not dividing by 2. We're dividing by 5. Got that switched around. We're dividing by 5, so we get 2. Now, if I say divide by 5 on the next one, I'm going to get a decimal, and we don't want decimals. I would get 0.4. We don't want that. So I just say, what's 2 divided by 5? Well, there you go. It's 2/5. And for the next one, how do I do 2 divided by 5? Well, don't do divided by 5. Or excuse me, how do I do 2/5 divided by 5? Do it as 2/5 times 1/5. Then all you do is 2 times 2 on the top and 5 times 5 on the bottom. Then you get your next number is 220, or your third number there that you had to find is 2/25. And there's our 3 numbers, and we did not get any decimals there. So I want these to be fractions, and I showed you how. So on your homework, you could just rewatch a problem that looks like the one you're doing and use the example in the notes to help you on your homework. Okay? So email me or Google Hangouts. Let me know of any problems. Keep posting your pictures. Guys, you're doing a good job. Talk to you tomorrow.